Hi everyone, I would just like to take you through my Intelligent Accounts Payable demo, which is going to show you how we can automatically process an invoice that has been received by email. Let's have a quick look at what this invoice approval process entails. When an invoice is received, we want to automatically extract all of the data from that invoice. When we have that data, we will then forward that on to someone inside your business for the first approval. This same person can add some coding or tracking categories to that invoice, as well as any comments they feel are necessary. If they are happy with that invoice, they would then approve it and it would move on to the finance stage. Once again, this person would be responsible for again reviewing all the account coding and tracking categories and invoice details. Once this has been approved in the finance stage, this would then automatically capture into the finance system of your choice. So that was just a quick overview. Let's move across here and look at all the steps involved. So what's going to happen when an invoice is received by email? Firstly, we're going to move that email into a separate folder called In Progress. We will then automatically generate an email response, which we will send to the vendor, just letting them know that we've received their invoice, and we will provide them with a reference number that they can use to track their invoice later on if needed. After that, we're going to take that PDF invoice and send it across to Abby for processing. Firstly, what Abby is going to do is actually classify that invoice for us and make sure that document is in fact an invoice. If that document is an invoice, but there are items on there that Abby is not actually able to identify, then what Abby does is it actually sends that invoice back to a human user for manual review. That person will then be able to see the invoice on one side of the pane, as well as the data Abby had managed to identify on the other side. They will then mark up that invoice in any way so as to extract all the details that are needed. Obviously, a best case scenario would be that Abby was able to extract all of the information, but for cases where there is a manual review required, the best thing about Abby is that it becomes more and more intelligent with every invoice that it sees, and it is continuously learning through that human interaction in the manual review. Okay, so now that we have all that data identified, the next step would be to export that data. This is where we kick off the approval process. From here, the first thing that we do is we send this data off to someone in your business who is responsible for the first approval of that invoice. They're able to do any specific coding for that invoice, as well as make any comments they feel are necessary. They can then make one of two decisions here. This is to either decline the invoice, in which case the vendor would receive an email notifying them of the decline, including any reasons for, or alternatively, they can approve the invoice. If the invoice is approved, then this invoice goes on to the finance review stage. This person might be someone in your finance team who can then also make sure the coding is all correct, as well as all the other details for that invoice. The approver and reviewer can then literally play bat and ball with this invoice. And what I mean by that is that if the reviewer were to decline the invoice because they needed some more information, this will then push back to the approver, including any comments. But once they are both 100% happy with all the details and the reviewer approves this invoice, this is then automatically captured into the finance system for payment. We can obviously capture this invoice into a variety of different systems, provided those systems have the relevant APIs available to do so. For today's demo, we will be writing this to Xero. If that invoice has been captured into the finance system, we then move that email into the completed folder. Or if something has gone wrong, when capturing that invoice, we would then send that email on to the relevant person in your organization to tell them this invoice needs to be manually captured. And finally, we send out an email to the vendor notifying them that the invoice has been processed, and we mark that invoice as completed. Okay, so that was the overview and all the steps involved. Let's now see it all in action. I just want to show you the invoice we're going to be working with today. It's from a business called World Trading States. It's just a standard invoice that we're going to be receiving by email. I also want to show you, just take you across and show you two different apps that we were using as well. The first being mapping for invoice approval settings. So I've created this app because inside your organization, you will probably have staff or different staff or different departments working or handling different accounts or vendors. So when you receive those emails, you want those emails to be directed to certain people. So you can see here the vendor we're working with today. I've created some email addresses for the approver and the reviewer. They're both the demo email address because that's the email address we'll be using today for the demo. Same goes for vendor coding. So if often there are vendors that you are working with on a continuous basis and you know what their account codes and their tracking category codes would normally be. So what we do is we create some default values for those, and these values will then be automatically assigned to that invoice. Again, you can see World Trading States. And let's just change those so we can have something different. Okay, excellent. So again, those values would be automatically assigned to the invoice as part of the approval process. Okay. Right, I've gone ahead and created the email already. You can see I've attached the example invoice that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to send that off. Right, so you can see now we're going to shortly receive that email. That email will be moved to the in progress folder. We're going to send the vendor an automatic email response, including their reference number. Right, the email has been received, so we mark that as read. That has been moved to the in progress folder. By the end of the demo, we hope to see it here and completed. Let's have a look for that vendor email. There we go. Thank you, your email has been received, your invoice is being processed. Here is your reference number. We also have an invoice tracker app where we can track that invoice and see where it's sitting currently. Let's have a look. Okay, so the email has been received and that email is now in progress. Okay, so let's go back to here and see where we are. Right now the email has been received and we've moved it to in progress. We've generated an automatic email response to the vendor. What we're going to do now is take that PDF invoice and send it off to Abby for processing. What we've asked Abby to do here now is to force every invoice it receives into manual review, just so we can show you how that process works. The next part of the flow, I've also made a manually triggered flow, again, just to slow this down again for demo purposes. I'm going to run that flow. Right, so shortly we should receive an email back from Abby telling us that this invoice requires a manual review. There it is. Okay, Abby sends us a link we can click on. This should take us directly into Abby, where on the left-hand side we will see the invoice, and on the right-hand side will show us all the details that Abby has managed to extract. You can see I also have an error here. This error is because I've not added the tax rate to the catalog. So Abby is just telling me or asking me to just make sure that tax rate is correct. So you can see if I add that in here, it should make that error go away. Perfect. Okay, and then the human user can then go through the invoice and see if there's anything else that Abby has missed. If there is, for example, let's use this, the invoice date. All the user needs to do is highlight that, and that is captured. Right, so let's complete that. Okay, so now we've completed the manual review. Just to mention again that, if there were items on that invoice that Abby was not able to recognize and a manual review was requested, then by having a human user highlight these items for Abby means that Abby has now learned from that interaction, and this would not be an issue the next time a similar invoice was received. Okay, so we've now processed and extracted the data and should shortly be receiving an email for review by the approver in your business. This kicks off the approval process. There we go. All right, on this email, you can see we have the invoice details as well as a link to the invoice approval form. If I open that up, we have all the invoice details on the left-hand side as well as the original invoice received on the right-hand side. Below that, we have the line items where we can see the default coding that we added earlier in the mapping vendor coding app has been applied. The approver can still make changes to these if they feel they need to, either by using the apply to all if there's more than one line item, or alternatively, they can edit these individually as well. I'm going to leave those as is. And all looks good. The default coding has been applied. Okay. I'm now going to get that off. We have now reached the finance stage for review. We should shortly now receive an email for the reviewer where they will also receive all the same details, but now they should see the comments that have come from the first approver. So let's wait and see for that email. Okay, there it is. Just going to open that up. Right, again, all the details are there. You can now see the approver's comments are here down below. So that's all good as well. Another thing I just want to talk about is we've actually created an escalation reminder email. This has been added for both the approver and the reviewer, just in case they get distracted when working on the approval. If that is the case, what we'd like to do is just send them a gentle reminder, letting them know that we are still waiting on their decision. The frequency of this email can obviously be changed, but for the purposes of today's demo, I've set this to 2 minutes. So that should be arriving anytime now. Okay, perfect. There it is. All right, I'm going to just go ahead. All looks good. Ready for payment. Right, let's get that off. Okay, so we have now completed both the approval and the review. That invoice should now capture automatically into Xero. We will have moved that email into the completed folder. At the same time, we've also generated an automatic email response to the vendor, just letting them know that their invoice has been processed. Okay, so let's have a look. There we go. So there's the email to the vendor. That email should now be in the completed folder. And let's go across to Xero. If we refresh that screen. Perfect. There is our World Trading Stace invoice captured into the finance system. Okay, so now that we have completed the invoice, I just want to show you how we can make use of Power Virtual Agents to do a little invoice lookup and see where that invoice is in the invoice approval process. So you can see we have just a demo site here, which we've created on the Power Apps portals. I've added a virtual agents button, which I've embedded in the website here in the bottom right. So let's open that and let's say hello. Okay. Name. rapidMATION.com is the demo email address that we used. Okay, so here it gives me two options, find my invoice and find my email. These two are very similar. The difference is that for find my invoice, we use an invoice number and email address, and find my email, we actually use the reference number and the email address. So let's try for this one, find my invoice. Okay, the invoice number was 757076. Yes, it was sent from that email. Excellent. So it's found the invoice there, and it has given us the day it was received, when it was moved to in progress, and when the invoice completed. All steps for 757076 have been completed. Excellent. All right. What I've done is add two more pages here. Find my email, find my invoice, which you've just seen. Let's try and find my email. Okay, and what we've done here is just used an iframe to link to the invoice tracker app, which I showed you earlier. So in find my email, we're going to use the reference number. And that same demo email address. Let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we've got all the processing stages, received, in progress, completed, and you remember where we went to manual review with Abby. That's taken that as well. What it's also given us is the comments at the bottom. So that's the comment from the approver and then a comment from the reviewer. So that all works very well.